You think you know me?
On this day, I see clearly everything is come to. When I look back at Edge's WrestleMania history, I see a guy who contributed to WrestleMania through specialty matches, whether it be TLC or Money in the Bank or that hardcore match that he had at WrestleMania 22. Edge really contributed a lot in offering a very different style and bringing that to WrestleMania, very high impact, very violent. And that was where he kind of found his place, and as a result, it ultimately led to him becoming a regular world title contender at WrestleMania. Granted, it was during the era where there were 2 world championship matches, and he was typically in the secondary world title match, which is part of my problem with having 2 world titles, is that you actually, to me, the term secondary world title is oxymoronic, but that's the system that the WWE created. But Edge was reliable for those spots, and they saw that. It was through these early performances where he was able to sort of earn his spot as a legit main event performer. But his WrestleMania legacy has humble beginnings. He started at WrestleMania 15 as part of the Brood, along with Gangrel and Christian, and they were part of the much larger Ministry of Darkness, which was the Undertaker's big stable. And they had a non-wrestling role, which kind of shocked me, because I thought, come on, they're good. And the gimmick's cool and everything, the whole vampire thing they got going. I thought it was a really cool gimmick. I was a little surprised that they didn't have a match. They didn't even get to be in the pre-show Battle Royal to determine the number 1 contenders to the tag titles, which I thought was a little surprising. But their role came after the Hell in a Cell match between Undertaker and Big Boss Man. After Taker won, they came down from the ceiling on those harnesses, Sting style, and they landed on top of the Hell in a Cell and punched a hole through the cell to give Undertaker the noose, which they used to hang the Big Boss Man, which was a nice, kind of sickening visual to have at a WrestleMania. Very shocking. So they got to be part of an interesting WrestleMania visual, if nothing else, even though they didn't have that large of a role to play. But their big coming out party would come next year. Obviously, Gangrel was out of the mix by this point, but Edge and Christian took part in a triangle ladder match for the tag team titles. It was Edge and Christian, the Hardy Boys, and the champion Dudley Boys going in. And this is coming just a few months after Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys had that great tag team ladder match at No Mercy 99, where that was a very innovative match. And you still see people to this day trying to emulate that match. It was very creative with some of the spots they came up with. It was a tag team match, so that offered a lot more creativity. And they took that to the next level with this one. And this was at a time when the tag team division in the WWE was red hot, and these were the top 3 teams. And you could see any one of these 3 teams winning, and they belonged together, and they all complemented each other very, very well. And Edge played a part in that. Edge played a part in this really, I like to call it not a spot fest match, but a highlight reel match, where it's really made to be a visual spectacle. And Edge and Christian played their roles very well in that. I think the Dudleys brought the tables in, which really brought a whole new level of what you can do in a ladder match. And in the end, Edge and Christian were given the tag titles, which really cemented them as the top tag team in the company. And after that, they became one of the hottest tag team acts in wrestling, the hottest tag team act in the WWE, for sure. And it really helped to really create like a tag team renaissance. Because, people, when they think of WWE tag teams, they think of the 80s. And that was when it was really hot. But they also think of this period, this late 90s, early 2000s period, where you were getting these type of matches, whether it be tables matches or ladder matches or TLC matches, which they would have later in the summer, SummerSlam 2000. And these 3 teams would combine in different types of matches, they'd wrestle each other, then they'd wrestle the other team, and then they'd wrestle all 3 in a different match. It was, they really got a lot out of those 3 teams working with each other so frequently. And they would have a TLC rematch. The first TLC match was at SummerSlam 2000, which was basically just the triangle ladder match, only with tables and chairs encouraged. And Edge and Christian, their specialty were the chairs. They did the concerto. Hardys were the ladders, Dudleys were the tables, and Edge and Christian were the chairs. They were the chairmen of the WWE. And this was kind of the burn-off to their ultimate pairings. They would have one more TLC match on SmackDown following WrestleMania 17. But this was the big burn-off to it, I saw. This was kind of the end of the epic, 3-way tag team feud. And I remember being kind of disappointed that they did a TLC match again because I felt like, it's great and everything, but we've seen this already. And I felt like this match kind of had a been there, done that type of feel to it, even though a lot of the spots were really creative. And where this one was different is that each team had a manager. The Hardys had Lita, the Dudleys had Spike Dudley, and Edge and Christian had Rhino. I guess manager is a bad word, more like a corner guy. So it was really like three-man teams going at it. So they got to take part in the fun as well. So that added something a little bit different. But I remember thinking at the time, it's like, we've kind of seen the ladder match, we've seen the TLC match, we've seen the tables matches. I'd like to see what they could do in Hell in a Cell. And that was kind of my wish, that they had actually done all 6 of those guys in Hell in a Cell. I thought that would be interesting to try, because they did a 6-man Hell in a Cell at Armageddon 99, and I thought, maybe they can make this work with these 3 teams. And, I'm picturing Jeff Hardy doing a swanton off the Hell in a Cell, or them doing monkey bars across the top of the ceiling of the cell while they're inside it, and doing table bumps or something. They could have done something really creative and crazy with it, I thought. But they went the TLC route, and it was good. I don't think it matches up to the WrestleMania 2000 match, but it was good. And Edge and Christian won this one. Like, they also won the SummerSlam TLC match. So in these 3 teams, the WWE really got behind Edge and Christian, and that's why they kept giving them these wins. And I think it was the right way to go, because they were the most entertaining. They were the best heels. And, heels to me typically are a better driving force behind storylines. And, if this was going to be the end of the big tag team wars between these 3 teams, this was a hell of a way to end it. And I thought it was a cool way to go. So that's 2 epic 3-way ladder tag team matches between 3 great teams, and Edge was one of the centerpieces of that. So that was a huge part of WrestleMania's legacy for him. Then he broke out as a single star following the Edge and Christian split in 2001. His first singles match at WrestleMania was not great. It was a homecoming. He was going back to his hometown of Toronto for WrestleMania 18, and he wrestled Booker T in a match where they feuded over who got to be in a Japanese shampoo commercial, which not only is stupid, but was pointless because we never got to see the commercial. Not to my recollection. I don't recall ever seeing the shampoo commercial. It's like, they're feuding over this thing. Don't you want to at least, show it to us? Just to see what the big hubbub is all about. And the match wasn't very good. It was very rushed and kind of sloppy, and not a very good, impressive singles performance for Edge, even though he did get the win. Which Edge won a lot of his early WrestleManias, and I'll get into that in a minute, and how I felt the WWE dropped the ball with his his early WrestleMania undefeated streak. But then he missed the next 2 WrestleManias due to a neck injury. He missed 19 and 20, and he came back shortly after 20. If I recall correctly, he made his return at Backlash 04, so he missed WrestleMania 20 by just a few weeks. But then he came back at 21, where he was in yet another specialty match, the very first Money in the Bank ladder match. And this was a risky thing for the WWE to try. I think a lot of people kind of looked at this match like, oh, they're just cramming 6 people into a match, and that's it. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of thought put into it beyond that. And it was him and 5 other guys. It was Kane, Chris Jericho, Christian, Shelton Benjamin, Chris Benoit, who, we're not supposed to remember that, and Edge, who was the ultimate winner of the match. And that was a sign that they really wanted to push Edge as a major, possible future main event player. And the fact that they gave him a win in a match like this was a really big deal. And the match was very good. It was a very good, again, one of those highlight reel type of matches, a great visual spectacle. And by giving him the win and showing as much faith in him as they did, Edge really helped cement this match, and it became an annual tradition for WrestleMania for the next few years, and then ultimately became its own pay-per-view. So they really trusted Edge to really help put this thing on the map. And it really paid off. Over the next year, he started the on-screen relationship with Lita, stemming from some real-life personal issues that had leaked online. And he ultimately became the best heel in the company. So you had this guy win this big match, get this title shot, walk around with this briefcase, and now he's hooked up with this girl, cheated a guy out of his girlfriend, his job in Matt Hardy, and ultimately, by the end of it, he's like, oh my God, he's like the best bad guy in the company. He was just red hot. And that Money in the Bank match was the starting point of Edge becoming a main eventer. And it really showed, wow, they really do have a plan for this guy, and they're really going to do something with him, really significant. And giving him that win was a good launch pad to really launching him as a single star. Now, then we get into WrestleMania 22, where he had a hardcore match with the legend Mick Foley. Now, my feelings on WrestleMania 22 and what Edge's role should have been are very different than what they went with. I felt like because he was the best bad guy in the company, and because they spent so much time building his heat, and because him winning the Money in the Bank title shot where he cashed in on John Cena earlier in the year, that should have been the launch pad to him going into WrestleMania as the heel champion. They didn't do that. I'll be sure to cover that in a future portion of this series. But I was very disappointed that they did that, because I felt like Edge was the best heel. He was red hot. They had all this heat built into him. And just when it was at its peak, the live sex celebration and, ratings were going up, they went around and just put the title back on Cena 3 weeks later so they could do Edge versus Mick Foley at WrestleMania, and Cena could be taken up with Triple H in the main event at WrestleMania. And I felt like Edge kind of got screwed. I felt like, all that went into his character and all the storylines that they wrote for him, it should have led to him main eventing WrestleMania. That said, he goes into this match with Mick Foley, which, to be perfectly honest, the feud was not that interesting because it was just a rehash of the Foley-Orton feud from 2 years earlier, and I thought that feud was much better. And they're going in there, they're going to have this hardcore match, and it's like, okay, whatever, I didn't really care. However, they went out there, and in my opinion, Edge and Mick Foley stole the show, and this match is one of the most spectacular matches in WrestleMania history, because there's nothing else like it. You've seen the wild street fights. You've seen matches with thumbtacks and barbed wire and lots of blood and crazy things like that, but never at WrestleMania. They even had the flaming table spot, which had never been done at a WrestleMania before, and you had Joey Styles on commentary, so this was basically an ECW match on the grandest stage of WrestleMania, and it really brought something different, and the effort that these two put into this match was just insane, and Foley really worked hard to help make Edge look really good in this match. And quite honestly, I remember going into this match thinking, yeah, Edge is going to win, yeah, Edge is going to get the rub, but he doesn't need the rub. He should be the main eventer. And I think after this match, a lot of people kind of realized, oh my God, Edge really is that good. And they kind of missed out on having him in the main event at WrestleMania 22. And to me, it's one of the big WrestleMania debacles. And Edge showed that he definitely did belong in that spot through his effort in this match and what he was able to create really with nothing. Because like I said, they did not have that strong of a storyline going into this match. And they went out there and just tore it down. And I felt like they had the best match of the night. I think it's Edge's defining singles performance at WrestleMania, without question. And because it's his defining singles performance, it is also his best WrestleMania performance ever. A great match, great moment for Edge. And ultimately, after this match, I think the WWE realized, oh, wow, Edge is so good, I guess we can't ignore it anymore. And sure enough, he became a regular main event guy after that, where he rightfully belonged. Then they turned around and kind of messed up with WrestleMania 23. And the reason they messed up is that they put Edge in the Money in the Bank again. It was him, I'm trying to remember, it was him and 7 other guys. It was him, Jeff Hardy, Matt Hardy, Mr. Anderson, or Mr. Kennedy back then, Randy Orton, King Booker, Finlay, and CM Punk. That was actually CM Punk's WrestleMania debut. And they put him in the Money in the Bank again, and I remember thinking at the time, it's like, Edge really shouldn't be in the Money in the Bank. I felt like he had been teaming with Randy Orton at the time as part of Team RKO, or Rated RKO. That was the name. Because, he was the Rated R superstar, and Orton's finisher was the RKO, so they were Rated RKO. Very creative. And I felt like because they didn't achieve much success with that team in storylines, they should have ultimately split with their egos getting in the way, and then had a match at WrestleMania 23 with Edge going over. And the reason I felt Edge should have gone over, I'll get into when I talk about Edge's role at WrestleMania 24. But putting him in the Money in the Bank again felt like they didn't really have a plan for Edge, which kind of drove me nuts. And I felt like Edge needed to be in the match where he needed to win, again, for reasons I'm going to get into in a minute. And then he just lost. The match went to Mr. Kennedy. And ultimately, the ironic thing is that Edge ultimately got the Money in the Bank title shot because Kennedy got hurt. So they just, through some roundabout way, they just gave the briefcase back to Edge. So he shouldn't have even lost his Money in the Bank match. But they did do a cool spot here where Jeff Hardy put Edge through a ladder, through a dive. He dove off of a ladder and put Edge through a ladder, and that was the first time I think that ever really been done before, where you saw a ladder get broken in half with two human bodies. So that was a spectacular spot, and it took Edge out of the match. But it killed Edge's undefeated streak at WrestleMania, which really, in my opinion, took away from his next WrestleMania match, where he faced The Undertaker for the World Heavyweight title in the main event. Undertaker obviously is known for the streak at WrestleMania. And Edge, like I said, he had won his first 5 WrestleManias. And I think that happened by accident. I know they obviously didn't plan that. Because, The Undertaker streak started as an accident. They didn't plan for it to be as big as it eventually became. And I felt like they really could have done something cool here and sold this match as undefeated versus undefeated. And I think that would have been a nice little tag for this particular WrestleMania match. However, it was still a big WrestleMania match for Edge because it was his first and only WrestleMania main event. He got to close out the show, which shocked me because I didn't think that they were going to get the closing spot. I thought they were going to give it to the 3-way between Orton, Cena, and Triple H. But Edge and Undertaker, they'd had a feud, actually, that was extended for about a year due to injury. They just couldn't have a match with each other. So ultimately, they got close to a year-long build-up out of this thing, just out of necessity. And Edge got to be the long-term champion going into this thing. And it was a really big role for him to be the top heel going into a WrestleMania main event and working with The Undertaker. It was really a big role to close out the show with Undertaker, and quite honestly, I felt the match was very good. I'm not going to sit here and say it's one of my favorite WrestleMania main events, but it is a very good one, and Edge was allowed to hang with Undertaker. I felt like they had much better matches later in the year, but this one was still very good. Undertaker, to no surprise to anybody, ultimately won the match and was allowed to keep his WrestleMania streak going, but it was a big match for Edge because he got to close out a WrestleMania, and that's a pretty elite spot that not many people get. And some people get that spot undeservedly, but Edge, through his performances in his earlier WrestleManias and everything he'd done in between those points, he certainly worked his way up to being one of those high-caliber performers to get that spot. And, his first main event should have been at 22, but, it was great to finally see him get that kind of treatment at a WrestleMania. But unfortunately, that was kind of Edge's last really significant WrestleMania matches. Like I said, he became a regular world title guy, but he was always in the secondary world title match and wasn't given that much to do as a result. At 25, he had that 3-way with Cena and Big Show for the world title, which had an awful feud, awful storyline with him and Vicky Guerrero, who were an item going as far back as WrestleMania 24, and the whole love triangle with Big Show, which was just terrible television leading into this. It really was one of the weakest Mania build-ups as far as world title matches go. And ultimately, I just didn't care. The effort was there. All 3 guys certainly tried. I will not quite... I would probably give the match a C, but they get an A for effort, and that's probably what I would say about this thing. It's really hard to care when creative kind of screws you over. And I remember I watched this WrestleMania in a bar, and I was sitting there just going, man, is this match over yet? Because I'm kind of done with this whole thing. Of course, then the main event for that show came up, and I was like, oh shit, go back to the 3-way. But, yeah, not that spectacular of a match, but through no fault of any of the performers. It was just that was the hand they were dealt, unfortunately. And then at 26, I thought he was going to have a really good one with Jericho for the world title. I thought that they could possibly have a really good WrestleMania match together, especially since Jericho didn't have a whole lot of big roles at WrestleMania either, so I felt good for him. And the storyline started with them as a tag team the year before. Edge got hurt, and Jericho ultimately went with Big Show as his tag team partner. And I remember thinking that the WrestleMania match should have been Jericho, Chris Jericho and Big Show, versus Edge and Christian for the tag titles. I think that would have been a really good, high-caliber, main event WrestleMania tag team title match, which you don't get many of those. And I think an Edge and Christian reunion would have been a really cool thing for WrestleMania, but DX won the tag titles, which kind of threw that whole thing out of whack, and then, there was some silliness going on with the world title that I'm not going to get into right now. But through some, weird roundabout way, Chris Jericho wound up with the world title. So with Edge coming back, he won the Royal Rumble, which was another big one for Edge, another big moment that he's a Royal Rumble winner, very elite class of guys. And and they must have a lot of faith in you if they, want you to win a Royal Rumble. And I thought, okay, these two will have a world title match. It'll be great. Once again, the build-up was not that good. Mainly because Edge as a babyface didn't really work. I think it can work, the Rated R Superstar, but they turned him into kind of a simpleton that only says one word: spear, 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 spear. And that was pretty much the extent of the feud, which was very disappointing because you got a guy like Edge and a guy like Jericho who can really handle himself on the mic. And you would think that they would turn up something better than that, but they didn't, and it was really bizarre. And ultimately, I didn't think the match was that good. I think it's one of the more disappointing WrestleMania matches. I thought it was average at best. I don't think it was as good as it could have been. And that's very disappointing because I did kind of have high expectations for that match. And Edge lost the match. And I thought, oh, maybe they're going to run with Jericho as champion. Then he just dropped it to Jack Swagger 2 days later. So it didn't really mean anything that Jericho won that match. And it was really disappointing. I thought that these two would do something a little bit better. And it just didn't happen at WrestleMania. Just one of those weird things where it just didn't click. I don't know why. But that leads us into WrestleMania 27, where Edge went in as World Heavyweight Champion against Royal Rumble winner Alberto Del Rio. Again, this is another match where they didn't really do a good job of building it up. Del Rio won the Royal Rumble, which I disagreed with, but I was like, okay, maybe they can do something good with it. But then they didn't build him up that well. He got super kicked by Shawn Michaels on Raw, who was retired by this point. There was no point to that. And then he lost to Christian on TV, and I'm like, wait a minute. If he can't beat Christian, what makes you think I'm going to believe he's going to beat Edge? And they did a really poor job of building up Edge's challenger for WrestleMania. And it really didn't feel like it was that big of a match. And ultimately, they opened up the show. There was a world title match that opened up WrestleMania, which just feels wrong. And feels like just really backwards, oxymoronic booking. Opening world title match. That's, wow, it's really bad. And the most disappointing part is that this turned out to be Edge's last WrestleMania match as he retired a few weeks later, much to the shock of everyone. And it just made me think, man, I wish they had done something a little bit more spectacular with Edge's WrestleMania, finale. My idea was Edge versus Christian. I think that would have been a good way to go. As a final farewell to Edge at WrestleMania, kind of have him work with his old partner at WrestleMania, but they were never that interested in pushing Christian. Christian only got the world title the month later because Edge retired, and it was kind of the best they could do with a feel-good thing, and the fact that they took the world title off of Christian as quickly as they did kind of confirmed that in my brain. But yeah, it was really disappointing that they didn't put any thought into this, and I mean, I'll be honest, the match isn't bad. It's a good match from bell to bell as far as the work goes, but nobody really cared, and it ultimately amounted to nothing. Edge won. Edge was given the victory, so really, nothing really came out of this match except that it was Edge's last WrestleMania match. And as a result, it's kind of disappointing that it played out that way. But then Edge retired, and that was the end of a great career in my eyes, where he brought a lot to the table in the years that he was with the WWE, especially after he became the Rated R Superstar. And in my opinion, became one of the hottest characters in wrestling, whether they always ran with it or not. He was always a very reliable talent that they could trust in those type of big main event spots. And, he was rewarded with a Hall of Fame induction a year later, and he came out at WrestleMania 28, which to date is his final WrestleMania appearance. And that's, I guess we can debate him going into the Hall of Fame this quickly is, a little too soon, but for what it was a nice feel-good moment for Edge to get the big nod there and the big farewell and everything. So, yeah, that's the legacy of the Rated R Superstar at WrestleMania, and again, want to emphasize that, specialty matches. That was where Edge truly shined.
It's time to play the game. It's all about the game, and how you play it, all about control. If you can take...
Remember when PWI gave Triple H Wrestler of the Decade, and a lot of people were left scratching their heads? To me, there are two ways you can look at that. Either A, from a artistic performance body of work standpoint, in which Triple H doesn't deserve it at all. I could name at least 10 guys that had a better overall body of work than Triple H did that decade. Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, Edge, who probably would have been my pick, Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho. I would throw Eddie Guerrero up there, even though he passed away in 2005 and technically only worked half the decade. Rey Mysterio. I would throw AJ Styles up there. And I would even consider putting like Randy Orton and John Cena up there, because Randy Orton's best work was throughout the decade. Like, his only bad stuff was with Triple H. Triple H had some of the worst matches, some of the worst feuds during that decade. Really, the only year where he was really untouchable as being the best in the biz was 2000. He was just a great overall performer that year, and that was by far the best year of his career. But there's another way to look at it, and that would be B. From a kayfabe standpoint, it's like, look, he's just been there the whole time. He's been there on top in a major role the entire time, and that's the justification for him being superstar of the decade. Well, I'm kind of going to take that same approach with his roles at WrestleMania. There are times at WrestleMania where Triple H has been flat out terrible. He has bombed a lot at WrestleMania, and some of them in major main events. He's had some of the worst WrestleMania main events ever. I would even say, if I were to rank like the worst WrestleMania main events, Triple H might have 3 or 4 of the top 5 spots. And that's kind of a sad designation to have, but his body of work at WrestleMania is not that stellar overall. However, he's in so many of these main events and so many big roles that it's sort of impossible to overlook him, whether we like it or not. He's one of the featured talents of WrestleMania through design of the WWE. Whether his body of work speaks, a high level of his ability is kind of pointless or irrelevant. It's just that he's been there in so many different roles and so many high caliber matches, whether they delivered or not, that Triple H is kind of an icon of WrestleMania just through saturation, basically. But let's start with his WrestleMania history. He debuted at WrestleMania 12 as Hunter Hearst Helmsley, doing the American Blue Blood gimmick, which actually wasn't a bad gimmick for him. He actually looks the part, and he looked the part back then anyway. So it wasn't actually that bad of a gimmick for him. I believe he was undefeated going into this match, but they threw him up against the returning Ultimate Warrior, and the Ultimate Warrior beat him in roughly a minute and a half. No sold the pedigree and just killed him, which was hilarious. And if you hate Triple H, this match is awesome. Some people look back on this match and just laugh. It's like, wow, Triple H really did a job like that? That's amazing. But he didn't quite have the stroke that he has now. So that was his WrestleMania debut. Not a very spectacular one, and I talked about it with Edge as well. That's kind of a common trend with a lot of these guys. They did not have a very spectacular WrestleMania debut. They ultimately had to grow into that main event role. But then he had a match with Goldust at WrestleMania 13, which is where China started to get into the mix. And China really added a lot to him, I thought, during those days. I felt like having this, mannish-looking, muscled-up woman as his backup really gave him a different kind of it made him stand out a little bit differently from other guys who had just had valets or managers. Gave him something a little bit different to toy around with in his matches. China played a big role in Triple H's time in 1997 and those earlier years. Unfortunately, the match with Goldust was not very impressive at all whatsoever. It was a bad match. This WrestleMania was bad, so that's not saying a whole lot. But this was not one of the better, mid-card matches. You would think that Goldust and Triple H would be able to put something good together, but it just didn't click. It was not a good match at all whatsoever. Then we go into Triple H's first good WrestleMania match, and that was with Owen Hart for the European title at WrestleMania 14. Like I said, it's his first good WrestleMania match. They worked a very different kind of style that you really hadn't seen in the WWE up to that point. Very, had sort of a Japanese type of feel to it. Some of the matches some of the moves that they were doing in the match. It was a very, very good mid-card athletic contest. I'm not going to say it's one of the best WrestleMania matches, but it was a good mid-card match to have, and one of the better European title matches in WrestleMania's history. Triple H. I forgot to note, he did win the match with Goldust, and he won this match as well over Owen Hart, retained the European Championship. But it's funny that people actually forget about the European title match, and they remember Triple H more for being Shawn's backup in the main event against Steve Austin with Mike Tyson thrown in the mix. So I think it speaks volumes of how big a main event role can be, to where, you can have a match earlier in the show, but if you played a role in the main event, people tend to remember that more. And that was a huge main event. So, it gave Triple H, even though he was playing a bit part, it gave him some exposure through being Shawn's backup in that role. Then he had another singles match with Kane at WrestleMania 15, where he was the leader of DX at this point, and he was feuding with Kane, where China betrayed DX and went off to the corporation, and this was kind of their way of doing this. Part of me kind of feels like they should have done China versus Triple H at WrestleMania, because China was a woman that could believably work with the men, and I think they could have gotten something out of that. But they did Triple H versus Kane, which was, again, not a very spectacular match. Of course, they had a cage match on Raw just a few weeks prior, so this felt kind of weird to do a regular match at WrestleMania just a few weeks after doing a cage match. But, excuse me. It is what it is. Triple H lost by DQ when China rejoined DX and attacked Kane with the steel chair. And, it was kind of the feeling that, oh my goodness, everything's back together. Triple H, has China back, and DX is stronger than ever. And then, of course, Triple H turns heel by attacking X-Pac during his European title match against Shane McMahon. This was the genesis of Triple H becoming the Triple H that we all know him for. This is where he started becoming the game and, the best in the business and all that stuff. And it was this heel run that really kind of started that. This is where he started rejecting the DX stuff, suck it, and being more of a party animal. And this is where he started becoming the more serious kind of badass heel, which would carry him into his best main event run in the year 2000, where he was definitely the best performer in the WWF at that point. And that, I guess that'll lead me into WrestleMania 2000. Triple H was the big heel champion going into a four-way match. It was Triple H defending the title against The Rock, Mick Foley, and The Big Show. And each one had a McMahon in their corner. Triple H was married to Stephanie McMahon, and storylines at this point wasn't real yet. Well, it might have been. They might have really been a couple by this point. I don't know. I wasn't backstage. I didn't follow their love lives, but they were a couple on TV at the time, and there was a McMahon in every corner, and that was kind of one of the very odd selling points of this match. I guess I was kind of getting tired of the McMahon family drama by this point, but they did the four-way, and much to my shock, Triple H won. Now, he had beaten Foley, at two major pay-per-views and at least a dozen times on TV, which really helped build his heat going into the show. And I felt like he should have dropped the title to The Rock. And I felt like that should have been the way to go. And it came down to Rock and Triple H, and I thought, okay, Rock's going to win the title, and it didn't happen. And as a result, it kind of created one of the worst endings in WrestleMania history because it was very anticlimactic. I'm like, really? That's your ending? And basically, the match that those two would have at Backlash a month later should have been the WrestleMania match. I felt like it should have been Rock and Triple H one-on-one. So I guess we'll call this Triple H's first strike in WrestleMania main events. It was a huge main event. I'm not blaming Triple H for it. It was just a bad booking decision. I'm not going to say it was one of the worst WrestleMania main events of all time, but it was certainly one of the worst endings. Just a very anticlimactic and dull, and there's no reason to go with that. Rock should have won the title, but it is what it is. And then the next year, Triple H was riding high off of his main event run in 2000, and he ran into The Undertaker. And this was one of the last great Attitude Era pairings. We'd never really gotten these two on pay-per-view. So for them to do it at WrestleMania was actually a really cool match to do. It got the 1 month build-up deal, and it wasn't, the recipient of a really long-term build-up. But for a 1 month build-up, it was very good, with Triple H being this dastardly heel that kept attacking Undertaker at every run. But then he had Stephanie put a restraining order on The Undertaker, so Undertaker couldn't get to him, which was just a brilliant thing to do to kind of keep Triple H's heat going into WrestleMania 17. And the match they had at WrestleMania 17 was very good. It was a wild and chaotic match where Triple H got chokeslammed off the stage, off this scaffolding that they did. Of course, they landed on some obvious padding, but it was still a really cool visual to have. And they did all sorts of wild things. They beat up the referee, and they fought into the crowd. It was a really crazy WrestleMania match, and definitely Triple H's best up to this point. Of course, he became another victim of the streak. Undertaker goes 9-0, but this was definitely Triple H's best WrestleMania performance up to this point. And then we turn around and we get one of Triple H's worst WrestleMania performances. The genesis of this started, Triple H in 2001 had torn his quad and was gone for 8 months. And he came back at the start of 2002 with this large ovation where the fans just cheered him like crazy, and it was obvious that he was going to be put on the path to get the title at WrestleMania, which at this time, the WCW and the WWF titles had been unified, so it was the Undisputed World Championship. And it was obvious that Triple H was going to be set up to do that, and he turned face. His marriage to Stephanie on screen came to an end. He won the Royal Rumble, and it felt like this should have been a big moment. This should have been a big WrestleMania main event where he would have worked with... He did work with Chris Jericho, who was the first Undisputed Champion. Also the guy who worked with him the night the Triple H's quad tour. So I'm thinking, it's like, okay, this WrestleMania feud should write itself, right? They threw Stephanie into the mix where she joined up with Jericho, which could have been a good idea if they were a couple. And it had been revealed that Jericho had been fucking Stephanie, and that was kind of their... the angle that they went with. This is not what they went with. They went with their business partners, because that's so sexy and storytelling-wise, that's so interesting to do that. I think it would have put a lot of heat on Jericho to do that, so that when Jericho does fall to Triple H, it ultimately has a bigger impact. And that's something that Triple H does a lot, where I don't think he understands that you got to make the villain look like he's awesome, so that when you do beat him, it means a lot, and it carries a lot of weight, and he builds up all this heat so that transfers over to you. And this happens a lot with Triple H matches, where he just has to look strong all the way through, and the villain that he's facing doesn't have a whole lot of heat as a result, and it results in lackluster matches like this, where Jericho goes into this match kind of looking like a bitch. The telltale sign of what went wrong with this match is that they come out on the stage for their entrances. Jericho comes out, and then he points to Stephanie, and she comes out. And that's basically what this felt like. It's, Stephanie was the true villain in this whole thing, and Jericho just felt like a placeholder champion to lose, and that was it. And it resulted in a very boring WrestleMania main event. And some people use the excuse that they had to follow Hogan and Rock. I think part of the problem is that the build-up was so bad. Had they actually taken the time to build this up, and let Jericho be the threatening world champion that he should have been, I think it would have turned out better. I mean, granted, you can't prepare for Hogan and Rock getting the reaction that match got, but you can prepare and make this match as good as it should be. And they didn't do that, and this match was a bomb, but Triple H got the Undisputed title, and at the end of the day, I guess that's what matters most. But yeah, this is one of the worst WrestleMania main events, in my opinion. I think it was a total bomb and a total failure, but Triple H got another Mania main event under his belt. Then at WrestleMania 19, he worked with Booker T in the secondary world title match. There were a lot of main events on the show, from Angle and Lesnar to Hogan and McMahon to Austin Rock 3 to Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho. And this was one of those main events, but it was the least spectacular of the 5 main events, which is weird for a world title match to have that designation, but that's the truth. Triple H was the world champion on Raw. He had turned heel again, and he'd pretty much run through everybody. And it got to a point where it was like Triple H had nobody to work with, because Rob Van Dam got kicked to the wayside, and Kane suffered through the Katie Vick angle, so he wasn't really that well built up. And they didn't really have... Goldberg hadn't been there yet. Rock was a heel, so they couldn't work together, and Austin was getting ready to retire, so they couldn't work with each other. And really, I mean, Triple H kind of had nobody, so they kind of had to go with Booker T, because he was the only kind of... He was a former world champion guy, and anybody else he could have worked with, like Angle or, guys like that, they were all over on SmackDown. So, maybe an Angle and Lesnar match, or a Triple H and Lesnar match would have been a good one to do, but Lesnar was on SmackDown. And this was also the first WrestleMania following the brand split as well, so you had a lot of that coming into play. It was a good match. I thought it was one of Triple H's better performances in 2003, which, artistically was the worst year of his career. I mean, he just had bad feud after bad feud. The Steiner feud was awful. The Nash feud was awful. The Goldberg matches were bad. He just had bad match after bad match after bad match. And, it really kind of destroyed the illusion that he was the best in the business and that he could get a good match out of anybody. I mean, Gray's like, oh, well, he was working with Steiner and Nash. I'm like, well, yeah, he says he's the best and he can get a great match out of anybody. I guess not. But this Booker match at WrestleMania was his best pay-per-view match of 2003. It was a good match. I didn't think it was a stellar classic or anything. Of course, Triple H won, of course, which needed to happen. But it was a good match, and I'm not going to say anything too bad about it beyond that. So then we go into WrestleMania 2000, which was another one of Triple H's main events, where he defended the world title in a triple threat match against Royal Rumble winner Chris Benoit and Shawn Michaels. And the build-up to this match was great, because Shawn and Chris Benoit both had legit claims to the title shot. Shawn had wrestled Triple H twice. He had that awesome match on Raw at the end of 2003, which was like Triple H's best match in seemingly eons. And then they had the Last Man Standing match at the Royal Rumble, both of which ended in a draw. So Michaels still had a legitimate shot at the title, because all their matches ended in draws. But then Chris Benoit, who was a SmackDown guy, won the Royal Rumble, and then opted to go to Raw to face Triple H. So you had this really big title match controversy, which I felt, normally when they do things like this, it feels forced, but this actually felt legitimate because you had two guys that had legitimate claims to facing Triple H for the title. And they ultimately went with the three-way, and you know what? It was an awesome match. I think it's one of the best WrestleMania main events ever. It's certainly Triple H's best WrestleMania main event, by far. None of the other ones even come close. And it was a very good match where all three guys really, poured everything they had into that match. And Chris Benoit ultimately won the title, a move I'm sure WWE regrets now, given how things turned out. But, it showed that Triple H doesn't have to win to have a great match. And, sometimes it kind of feels that way where it's like matches are designed just for Triple H to win. But his best main event, by far, is this one. And it was in a losing effort. And it was he belonged in this spot for this one, and it was an excellent match. Excellent match. One of the best WrestleMania main events. And in my opinion, Triple H's best WrestleMania match, period. I think it's that good of a match. It's just unfortunate that because of Chris Benoit, we're not supposed to remember that match. And then we go into the string where Triple H was in a couple of WrestleMania main events. He main evented WrestleMania 21 versus Batista. And I remember thinking that the match should have been Triple H versus Randy Orton after the Evolution split. I actually felt like the way they did that, I felt like Orton should have kicked Triple H out of Evolution and then built up Triple H as the face to ultimately having his revenge at WrestleMania 21. But they did the opposite, where Orton turned face, and when his face run flopped, because Triple H made him look so good in those matches, they had to go a different direction with Orton, and they ultimately went with Batista to face Triple H. Again, not a bad match. I didn't think it was, a terrible outing, for Triple H, but it wasn't a very good one. It was kind of average kind of match. Batista was unproven at this point. They made the mistake of making the match over 20 minutes long, where Batista had to sell. And if you've ever seen Batista work, you know that he's not very good at selling, so I don't know why they opted to go that route. Personally, if I were to book this match, it should have been like Goldberg versus Hogan in '98, where the heel keeps hitting the superhero, unstoppable babyface with everything that he's got, and he just keeps coming. He just keeps coming and coming and coming, and there's nothing the heel can do, and he has to pull out every cheap tactic in the book to ultimately get an advantage. But no, they work the typical heel gets over on the babyface, and the babyface works a comeback and everything, which is not the style that Batista should be working, so I don't feel like the match really worked as a result. It wasn't a terrible match, but it was an average one, very average. And Triple H put the title on Batista, which is one of the only stars he's helped make. But considering that Batista, I knew at the time, it's like Batista's going to retire before Triple H does. So it's almost like, yeah, he made this guy. But it's like, yeah, but he's going to be gone before Triple H is, so what's the point? And ultimately, it turned out that was exactly what happened. Then we get to WrestleMania 22, and my feelings on this match are so different from everybody else's. A lot of people seem to love this match. Or at least really like it. I've never heard it held up there as one of the best main events, thank God. But I have talked to a lot of people that really liked it. And maybe it's just because of me being upset over what they did to Edge, and I felt like Edge should have been in this spot. But to me, Triple H versus John Cena for the WWE title at WrestleMania 22 is one of the worst matches. I hate this match. I despise, loathe, and detest this match. I need my thesaurus back to get all the adjectives I need to properly put into words how much I just utterly hated this match. Now you're probably thinking, why do you hate this match? Well, the entrances were stupid, number one. And let's take Edge out of the equation. It's like, okay, they already fucked up with Edge. By this point, okay, I'll accept it if you come up with something good in the meantime. They built this match up in this really weird way where Cena was the underdog going in against Triple H. And I'm thinking, okay, Triple H is coming off, kayfabe-wise, Triple H is coming off one of the worst years of his career. He lost to Batista like a dozen times. He got beat up by Ric Flair. Ric Flair beat him at least once. He's not the unstoppable heel champion that he was in 2004. Going into WrestleMania 20. He's not, or even going into WrestleMania 21. He's not that guy. He'd had a really bad year in 2005. John Cena had been WWE champion and won pretty much every pay-per-view match except for the Money in the Bank cash-in against Edge, and then that was negated 3 weeks later anyway. So how is Cena the underdog? I don't understand. It's like, dude, no, you're the underdog. But they tried to paint the picture like Cena's the underdog going up against the Ultimate Challenge, which kayfabe-wise made absolutely no sense, given the previous year that had gone on between both characters. But okay. Then they get to WrestleMania, and they do these entrances where Triple H comes out dressed like Conan and looks utterly stupid. And it's a shame, too, because the entrance was actually cool, where he comes out on the throne, because he's the King of Kings, and with that Motorhead song, the King of Kings, it sounded really cool. I was like, okay, this is awesome. And then you see that he's wearing a Conan suit, and it's like, oh, dear Lord. And it's like the coolness of that entrance just got flushed right down the tubes, and Triple H looked utterly stupid. And then John Cena comes out dressed like a gangster, doing that whole stupid entrance, and that was even worse. And it was like, okay, so we've got a cartoon show going here in the main event at WrestleMania. And I could have forgiven it if they had done it at 21. WrestleMania 21 was WrestleMania Goes Hollywood. I was like, all right, it's stupid. It's kind of like WrestleMania 9 with the Roman theme that they had. It's like, yeah, it might be a little silly, but they are in Caesar's palace, so at least I understand the method to the madness and the thought process behind the decision. This made no sense. So I don't even know why they did what they did. The only thing I could think of is that Triple H wanted to roll in the new Conan movie, because that movie had been in production hell. There had been talk of a new Conan movie for years. And maybe Triple H was just wanted that role and was trying to make himself look like Conan. And because he was doing that, they needed to come up with something for Cena, and that's how we got those really, really stupid entrances. And then we get the match. And this is the point where Cena had really started getting the really negative reactions. And this is where it really reached a fever pitch, where most of the crowd was chanting, fuck you, Cena. It wasn't just like, okay, let's go Cena, Cena sucks. It was, let's go Cena, fuck you, Cena. I mean, it got really, really bad. And it was clear that Cena was not working as the top face, because so many of the fans just hated his guts. And and Triple H going out there, and he made it even worse, because he just kind of, like, the match felt like Triple H was jerking off to himself, because it kind of had this vibe to it that Triple H was going around working the match like going, hey, look how popular I am, even though I'm the villain. And it just made Cena look like a goof in the match. I mean, Cena looked like it was a character that was just a failure. That's what Cena looked like in this match. And Triple H did very little to make him look good. It was a disaster. And this is also the match that started the boo yay punches. Boo, yay. I hate that spot. I despise that spot, and it's become a mainstay, and it drives me crazy. And the reason I hate it is because it's such an obvious theatrical thing. It's like, okay, boom, I hit you, and now I'm just going to wobble around for a bit and wait for you to hit me. And it just looks so hokey and contrived, and it doesn't look like they're really fighting each other. It just looks like they're obviously working the crowd to get a reaction. And there are spots like that, like, the mounting the corner and just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the audience counts along, but at least it's one guy pummeling the other one, so the audience counting along is just a bonus. That just looks so obviously theatrical to me, and the fact that it's been somewhat of a mainstay in wrestling since then just kind of drives me nuts. And in the end, I thought it was a really boring match, too. I really just couldn't get behind this match. I actually fell asleep the first time I watched it, and then I had to go back and watch the rest of it. So, yes, I had to watch this match in 2 sittings, and it was boring. I didn't care. Cena won. Yippee. I don't really give a shit. And by the time it was over, I just had to sit there and think, and Edge couldn't be in the main event? Really? We couldn't have that, but we could have this? Okay. Fuck you. It's like, I think this match is terrible. Absolutely fucking awful. And it doesn't get the reputation for it that I think it deserves. But I seem to be in the minority of people who think that this match is really bad. But oh well. They were going to do it again at WrestleMania 23. And of course, because, I loved it so much the first time. We got to do it again at 23. Obviously with Triple H going over. Which I'm willing to bet was the plan. But God said nay to that and struck Triple H down by having him tear his other quad in January. So it's like, no, you are not making WrestleMania, and we are not getting Cena and Triple H again, which, I never like to root for an injury, but I was not upset that match didn't take place. So I was kind of like, well, at least we got spared that match. Triple H made his WrestleMania return at WrestleMania 24. He actually came back later in the year at SummerSlam. 2007, but his WrestleMania return was at 24. Worked a 3-way match for the WWE title against champion Randy Orton and John Cena, which, you know, if you've listened to my previous videos, you know that cycle of matches, you know, Triple H and Orton and Cena and Triple H, I hate those matches. And especially by '09, I just gotten completely sick of it. We're in '08, so I hadn't been completely, you know, sick and tired, you know, to a vomiting-inducing rage at this point. But it was still not a match I was overly excited for. Cena won the Royal Rumble in that shock return, but then he wasted the shot in February against Orton. So, which again, I didn't know you could do that, but I didn't know that was a rule that you could, you know, cash in the title shot anytime you wanted, like Money in the Bank. But whatever, I'll just pretend it makes sense. And then they did this triple threat, which I thought was going to main event. Because it's Cena and Triple H. I'm like, oh dear Lord, they're going to close the show and it's going to be awful because I'm not going to care. It did not main event. They gave Edge and Undertaker the closing spot, and as a result, this match was pretty good. You don't give this match the main event, it's actually not that bad. And it was a pretty good, solid match. And they actually shocked me with the ending where Orton went over and retained the title. Because I was thinking, all right, it's going to be either Cena or Triple H. We know that. Because that's just what the gods have decided. But Orton retained the title, and I was like, oh, you actually legitimately surprised me with your ending there. Because at that point, I was like, I don't need to see Cena or Triple H as champion again. Of course, both of them would get many other title reigns following this, so it didn't really matter. But, yeah, it was a good match. Wasn't a special classic, wasn't particularly memorable, but it was good. And I'll take a good match from Triple H at this point. Then we get to 25, another one of Triple H's classic WrestleMania main events where he works with Randy Orton in one of the most boring matches I have ever seen. And because it was a WrestleMania main event, that just magnifies how boring it was. It was like watching, it was just inevitability. You all knew that Triple H was going to win. So this really long and plotting match just was awful. And it was awful. And the build-up, a lot of people seem to like the build-up. I did not, and here's why. They tried to paint Orton like he was the heel. And he was the heel because he beat up Vince McMahon. And it's like the Lesnar thing that they're doing right now. How am I supposed to feel sorry for Vince McMahon? He's this evil, corrupt person that screws with people's lives and fires people for no reason. I mean, this is the character that's been presented to us. And so, you know, and why did he attack Vince McMahon? Why did Randy Orton attack this guy? Because Vince McMahon was about to fire him for no good reason because he's a bully and a jerk, and Orton punted him in the head. Good for Orton. It's like, oh, Vince bit off more than he could chew and he pushed around the wrong guy. How am I supposed to feel sorry for Vince? He's an asshole. And the fact that they tried to build heel heat on Orton by attacking the McMahons, I thought was weak sauce, because like, these are terrible people. These are the characters that you gave to us for years. They are awful people. And I'm supposed to feel sorry for them? Fuck that shit. And, of course, because it's Triple H, you know, Orton would get over on him one week, you know, when he DDT'd Stephanie or something, but then the home invasion would happen, which was one of the worst filmed things that they've ever done. I mean, look at the Brian Pillman and Steve Austin home invasion angle that they did, which, you know, some people are mixed on that angle even happening with the gun and everything and thought maybe that was too far, but look at how it was shot. That shooting, and that angle felt much more realistic and far more intense than the Triple H and Orton home invasion segment, which really felt like something out of a bad movie. The way it was shot with all the camera angles, it looked overly produced, whereas, you know, the Austin Pillman one felt like something that was really happening in real time and a lot more intense because of it. And, yeah, so I didn't really dig the build-up. And even if you really did feel sorry for the McMahons throughout the build-up, they came back the last week before WrestleMania anyway, and the go-home Raw ends with Triple H beating the shit out of Orton, so, you know, you undid your heat. You know, whatever heat you had on this guy. And, you know, Orton goes into this WrestleMania saying, I'm going to be the next Triple H. I'm going to beat this guy and start my own legacy. And then he just gets his ass kicked for 25 minutes or half an hour, however long the match was. And it was awful. It was terrible. And again, they used the excuse that they had to follow Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. And you know what? My feeling on that is, if you can't follow what came before you, then you shouldn't be the main event. You know, Savage and Steamboat was one of the greatest matches of its time. You know, one of the most defining, influential matches of all time. Hogan and Andre still followed it, and they still gave people something to remember in their main event. And people were still hyped for that match. I mean, listen to the audience during that match. They're still buzzing for Hogan and Andre. So I don't think that's a valid excuse. If you're not a main event worthy match and the people don't care going into it, then you shouldn't be the main event. It's like the three-way at 24. You know, as a main event, it would have been terrible, but because it got the under spot, and Edge and Undertaker was allowed to follow it, you know, it worked better in that spot. It didn't work as a main event. And this match was awful. It was terrible. Probably Triple H's worst at this point. But Triple H won, and he was, you know, WWE champion. So that is what it is. And then we go to another non-Triple H main event WrestleMania in 26 where he worked with Sheamus. And they had opportunities with this match to make it bigger than it was. I mean, okay, they put the WWE title on Sheamus in December, which I thought was a huge mistake. They rushed him too much. But they could have done things where, like, Sheamus eliminated Triple H in the Elimination Chamber match the month before, or something like that. None of that happened. It was just like, hey, we're feuding now, and this is going to be your Mania match. But it was an early match on the card, and it was treated like an undercard match. And you know what? As an undercard match, it was okay. It wasn't anything great. There was a lot of inevitability in it, and I don't think he made Sheamus look very good. At no point in this match was I convinced that Sheamus was going to win. It was just an inevitable Triple H win, but because it wasn't a main event, it was okay. If they had main evented with this, and this had been a world title match, it would have been a disaster. But because, again, I was not convinced at all that Sheamus was going to win this match. But Triple H got the win, and it was like this forgettable mid-card match. Okay, it was painless. I'll take it. It was painless. Then you go into WrestleMania 27 where he worked with Undertaker in a no-holds-barred match, which was, you know, for all the times that he's bombed at WrestleMania, Triple H actually kind of saved this one. It's not one of my favorite WrestleMania matches, but it is a very good one. Just a nice, you know, type of no-holds-barred type of brawl with a lot of, you know, crazy violence and about 8,000 kickouts. So it kind of worked. And the ending with Undertaker being injured and having to be stretchered out really set up their match for next year in the Hell in a Cell. And that one was better. I thought with Shawn Michaels as the referee, I thought that he added a lot of drama to the match as well. And I'll be honest, going into this match, I'm like, oh, Undertaker's going to win because it's a streak, and Undertaker always wins at WrestleMania. But when they did that spot where Shawn super kicked Undertaker and then Triple H pedigreed him, that was the one time where they kind of got me and I thought, oh my God, the streak's over. Or the streak might be over. It wasn't a huge sell, but at this point, you know, Undertaker, you just kind of assume that he's going to win. So for them to even get me a little bit was kind of cool. And they had a pretty exciting match, I thought. It was a very good match. It wasn't the end of an era because Triple H wrestled after that. He's going to wrestle again, and we're all expecting Undertaker to wrestle again. So it wasn't the end of anything. But as far as being a great WrestleMania match goes, it was a great one. And part of me wishes that Triple H would just quit while he's ahead because, look, dude, you had, after a string of some really bad ones, you had two really, really good WrestleMania matches. So might want to quit while you're ahead, but that's not going to be the case. But overall, you know, Triple H's legacy at Mania is not necessarily one of artistic excellence, although he did have his great ones. The match at 20 and the two matches with Taker. His was just, he's just the guy in a huge role, and you just always see his face in big WrestleMania matches and main events, whether they're that good or not. He's just one of the WrestleMania icons just by virtue of promotion and just his face always being in those huge spots. Next, we're moving right along to Macho Man Randy Savage. Oh, yeah. Snap it to a Slim Jim. And, you know, what is there to really say about Macho Man Randy Savage? He's one of the all-time greats in the art form of professional wrestling. He was one of the first guys I ever watched. And he caught my attention immediately. I just looked at the guy and I knew he was a star. He had this over-the-top, great personality that was just made for entertainment in general. And, I mean, he just stands out so much, and that's not even taking into account his great wrestling ability and what a great worker he really was. And that was what he contributed to the early WrestleManias. What Shawn Michaels ultimately became known for, which was having the best matches at WrestleMania, Savage was that guy in the first, 8 WrestleManias or so, where he was just having the best matches. Regardless of what the main event was, regardless of what the major attraction was, Savage more often than not had the best matches, and that was his major contribution. You could even say that the term WrestleMania caliber match probably began with Savage and the matches that he had at the early WrestleManias. So let's dive right into it. What was Savage's WrestleMania history? Well, He made his debut at WrestleMania 2 as Intercontinental Champion, where he worked with George the Animal Steele. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be a technical classic, given the abilities of George the Animal Steele. It was more of a character-based worker. But with what they did, I thought it was a really entertaining match. I think it's a great, comedy match that captured the storyline that they were doing, where George the Animal Steele was in love with Miss Elizabeth, who was Savage's manager. Very attractive manager, I might add. Miss Elizabeth, and maybe this is where my thing for brunettes started, but between her, the Pink Power Ranger, Jennifer Connelly, I just got this thing for dark-haired women, and I think this is probably where it started. But Elizabeth was beautiful, and she's another one that's unfortunately no longer with us. But I thought this match was pretty entertaining. I thought, the whole storyline they had with George and Liz was really funny. And Randy playing this jealous, abusive boyfriend type, he really became like one of the best at that type of storyline. You've seen that storyline done several times since then, but Savage was one of the best, and he was a real dick as as he controlled Miss Elizabeth, and a great heel. And so this match was really entertaining, and it actually played into what they did at WrestleMania 3, where George the Animal Steele was in Ricky Steamboat's corner for that Intercontinental title match. And let's get into that. In a day and age where the Intercontinental title almost means nothing, back in the 80s and at some points in the 90s, the Intercontinental title was a semi-main event. And Randy Savage versus Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 3 is one of the most influential matches of all time. And it had a great feud going into it. It was the injury angle done to perfection, where Savage attacked Ricky with the ring bell during a match, and he dropped it. He came off the top rope and dropped the ring bell on Ricky's throat, and broke his larynx. And they played up the angle like Ricky was retired and he was going to be done with wrestling. That's an injury angle done to perfection, because nowadays especially, they'll get hurt 1 week and 2 weeks later they'll be fine, or in some cases they'll be back the next night like nothing happened. That was not the case here. They sold it like, oh my god, this could really be the end of Ricky Steamboat's career. And that really made it all the more all the bigger payoff when Steamboat came back and wanted to get his hands on Savage, and ultimately worked his way to getting an Intercontinental title shot at WrestleMania. And he had George the Animal Steele in his corner to sort of pay off that storyline as well. And Savage, to me, is one of the best Intercontinental champions. He doesn't always get credit for it, but to me, the reign he had as champion, with all the storylines in place and all the people he feuded with, he really did have a great run with the belt. And that match with Steamboat, oh my god. I mean, you can see the fingerprints of that match today, and the way a lot of indie matches are worked especially, and whenever you see two like more smaller, high-flying guys, you think of this type of match. I mean, this match probably was an influence for a lot of the cruiserweights. It was an influence for Chris Jericho, and you can see Jericho definitely work this match into a lot of the matches that he does. And Savage was obviously a huge influence on Jericho. I don't doubt that at all. And it really brought that high-flying, fast-paced, breakneck speed kind of style to a huge mainstream level. Because, you'd see it in Japan maybe, and WWE did have a junior heavyweight division that was featured in popcorn matches on house shows once in a while, but never on this big kind of stage with such a huge audience. And it really influenced the way matches were worked in the future. It really opened up the doors for that style of worker to possibly move up and be main event workers. And Savage was just perfect for that. And, this was one of the first truly great WrestleMania matches. And, Steamboat got the win, but really all that did was open up the door for Savage to eventually be worked into the main event scene. And that'll pay off in WrestleMania 4, where you had the championship tournament, which was born out of that controversy in the Hogan-Andre rematch, where Ted DiBiase tried to buy the WWE title, and the title had to be vacated, and the Mega Powers formed, which, by the way, I was talking to somebody recently, and he said that when he saw the Mega Powers form, Hogan and Savage turned face, and Hogan and him united, and they, when they shook hands, and they became the Mega Powers, he told me that when he was a kid and he saw that, he was like, that's not fair. I'm like, what do you mean that's not fair? It's like, Hogan and Savage as a team, That's too much awesome for one team. It's like nobody will be able to beat them. That's so unfair to have that kind of team. It's like having Tom Brady and Randy Moss on the same team. Oh wait, that happened. And look at what the results turned out. It's like a totally unfair pairing. Or Montana and Jerry Rice. It's that type of thing. But heading into WrestleMania 4, you really had 4 guys that you would think, okay, maybe 3 because Andre was on the back end of his career. So you're thinking, all right, the winner's going to either be Hogan, Andre, or DiBiase. DiBiase got to the finals, and so did Savage. Savage had to work 4 matches, while DiBiase only had to work 3 because he benefited from Hogan and Andre ending in a draw. So he got a bye and only had to work 3 matches. Savage had to work 4. Started off with a match with Butch Reed in the first round. Then in the second round, he worked with Greg Valentine, which I thought was a mistake. They could have done a Steamboat Savage rematch in the second round, and I felt like they should have done that. It could have been face versus face with Savage getting the win, and him and Steamboat kind of burying the hatchet at the end and ending that with shaking hands. And then Savage moves on to face the one-man gang in the third round, defeats him, and then you get to the finals where Savage has worked 3 previous matches going up against $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, who had Andre the Giant in his corner. And then during the match, as Andre's cheating to help DiBiase, Hulk Hogan comes out to even the odds. And ultimately, through Hogan's intervention, Savage wins the WWF title. And I have my problems with WrestleMania 4 as a whole. I don't think the tournament was as well put together as it should have been. At times, it was actually kind of confusing, but it was totally worth it just to have Savage win the title. And, nice little designation here. Savage is the first guy to win the WWF title at WrestleMania, because before this, it had just been successful Hogan title defenses. So Savage was the first guy to actually win the title at WrestleMania. So that's a big designation for him. And it was the first really big championship celebration with Hogan and Liz in the ring, giving Savage his props. And it's really a great moment and a really satisfying conclusion to WrestleMania. And it was Savage's night in the sun, where WrestleMania was actually built around him. And it worked out really, really well. And it really set the stage for WrestleMania 5. Because the Mega Powers had been a team, and they'd worked together throughout the years. Savage was the champion, but him and Hogan were a team. And Hogan was still the more popular guy. And that, fueled a lot of jealousy within Savage, that really, he had turned babyface and thought, oh, well, he's changed. He's not that same dickish, overly controlling, jealous guy that he was before. And then as the partnership continued, they'd worked a few matches at SummerSlam and Survivor Series. Hogan eliminated Savage from the Royal Rumble. And then there were, jealousy was arousing from Savage thinking that Hogan was going to steal Miss Elizabeth. And that became a thing. And then it just boiled over, and then you realized, oh, wait, this character, he's exactly the same. He never really changed. He's still this jealous asshole. And now he's the World Heavyweight Champion. And it led to the Mega Powers exploding and having this main event, which to me is one of the defining WrestleMania main events of the 80s. Because it's the 2 most recognizable stars of the 80s. It's Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage. And Savage, for all his technical ability, was the one character that could really live up to somebody like Hulk Hogan at the time. And it was really a perfect pairing, and the angle was great, the build-up was great, and the match was great. It was actually the first WrestleMania match I ever saw. It was the first wrestling match I ever saw. And I was an instant fan right away. The second I saw that match, I was like, I'm a fan. This is awesome. Whatever this is, it's awesome. And it was a great setup, great match. I would say the best WrestleMania main event up to this point. And it was just a classic in my eyes. And Hogan won the title, so yay, Hogan wins another one. But it was Savage's really great WrestleMania main event, and it really put him in an elite class of having, because only, 28 WrestleMania main events, a lot of them have double, matches. Savage is up there in that elite class of WrestleMania main eventers through this match. And he put together, I think, one of Hogan's best Mania matches. So it really came off really well and was a great main event to WrestleMania 5. Then into WrestleMania 6, he kind of took a lesser role, as he worked the mixed tag match. It was him and Sherry, who was now his valet at this point. And Sherry was great with Savage. They worked together really, really well. And they were doing the Macho King and Queen bit at this point, which, for most characters, that's kind of the death sentence, where they instantly put the crown on you and you just kind of look like you're in a silly costume. But Savage really made it work, and maybe because Savage was so crazy to begin with that him on a throne and a crown and everything just kind of fit his his more colorful and flamboyant presentation that he already had to begin with. So Savage as the Macho King actually kind of worked. But he worked with Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire in this mixed tag, and they had Miss Elizabeth in their corner, she was a surprise appearance. And it's a fun match, and Sherry really showed how good she was as she had to try and get a good match out of Sapphire, which, it was obvious watching this match that Sapphire had never worked a match before. But Sherry actually kind of made it work by selling for her. And the match was entertaining. It was fun. It was just a strange demotion for Savage to, after WrestleMania 3 and WrestleMania 4 and 5, for him to have this kind of a role kind of felt like, oh, what happened here? Why did Savage get this, demotion here? But, even in a demoted role, it was a fun match and it was entertaining, so you can't say that he didn't deliver the best he could. But then we get to WrestleMania 7. He's still doing the Macho King bit, and he's got this great feud going with Ultimate Warrior, who is another over-the-top, wacky, insane personality. So those two characters were two peas in a pod, so it was a perfect fit from a character standpoint. And the feud got so intense with Savage costing Warrior the title that it was decided that the company wasn't big enough for these two. So the loser of this match would have to retire. Now, it was a wrestling bullshit retirement, and actually, the strange thing is that Savage actually ended up lasting longer in the company than Warrior did, and Warrior won the match. So it's funny how that worked out. But this match, to me, is one of my personal favorite WrestleMania matches. Because I always change what I was like. If you ask me on any given day what my favorite WrestleMania match is, I'll give you a different answer, because there's so many great ones to choose from. It's hard to pick just one. So you ask me that question, what my favorite is, I'll give you a different answer probably every day. But Randy Savage versus the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 7 is one of those matches that I often say, you know what, that might have been my favorite. This match was so dramatic and so emotionally charged that I really believe that these two were fighting for their careers. Like, they were fighting for more than a title. And the things that they did to each other in this match, when Savage hit 5 elbow drops on the Warrior and Warrior kicked out, normally I would probably be shaking my head at that. But actually in this match, kicking out of 5 finishers or even 2 finishers was unheard of. So, nowadays it's probably commonplace, but back then it was unheard of. I would probably shake my head at it, but in this match it just fit because it felt like they were just fighting for their careers. And Savage kicked out of Warrior's finishers, and it was just a wild and crazy match with a lot of emotion that saw Savage lose. And this match really doesn't get enough praise, I think, for being as good as it is. I think it's one of the best WrestleMania matches ever. It's exciting, it's dramatic, and it's awesome. And the cherry on top was at the end. Savage lost, his career's over. Sherry goes nuts and starts attacking him because she lost her meal ticket. Miss Elizabeth is sitting in the crowd, and we hadn't seen her in a while. And it felt appropriate for her to be there because through the highs and the lows, she had been a major part of Savage's career. She comes out, jumps the guardrail, and attacks Sherry, throws her out of the ring. And then Savage and Liz reunite at WrestleMania. And it was one of those just wonderful emotional moments where you really got a payoff to the Savage and Elizabeth relationship. They'd put years and years into this relationship. Again, peaks and valleys, highs and lows, good times and bad. And this was the ultimate payoff to it. This ultimate reunion was a great emotional moment. You can see women in the crowd crying, and I don't believe they were plants. They were legit crying, which is unthinkable for a wrestling angle, but they really had a great emotional moment. It felt like the ending to a movie, almost. And part of me wishes this really had been the end of Savage's career, because it was the perfect way to go. It's like you can't write a better ending than that. It was beautiful, it was touching, and even as a guy, and I was 6 years old when I saw this, and I was like, oh, it was a cute, emotional, great ending to a great WrestleMania match. And I think, WrestleMania 4 was built around him, and he had that great match with Hogan, and the match with Steamboat is one of the most influential matches ever. But to me, this was Savage's defining WrestleMania moment, was this match with the Warrior. It was a great match, and it had that ultimate emotional moment at the end. It was beautiful, just beautifully done, and I can't praise it enough. It's one of my all-time favorites. And, of course, Savage didn't retire, though, which is probably the downfall of it, and maybe that's why people don't think of it as highly as they should. But Savage came back later in the year, and he found himself in the world title match at WrestleMania 8, which I thought, again, he was working with Ric Flair, who won the title at the Royal Rumble, and they did the love triangle angle where Ric Flair said that he and Liz had a relationship before she was with Savage, and that, you know, the doctored pictures came out, and Flair promised that he had nude pictures of Liz that he was going to post at WrestleMania, which we never saw those pictures, by the way. Just saying. Which probably, given that Liz is no longer with us, it's probably creepy of me to mope about that now, but, you know, whatever. That's neither here nor there. But they went out there, and they didn't main event. They gave the main event to Hogan and Sid, which was supposed to be Hogan's bullshit retirement match. But they had the best match of the night. This was actually, if anything, it was almost too good because WrestleMania climaxed, and everything that followed just felt second rate. This was an excellent title match, and it's one of my favorite world title matches in WrestleMania history. It was just a really exciting match from start to finish, where even Perfect was Flair's executive consultant. They didn't call him a manager; he was an executive consultant. And Mr. Perfect involved himself in the match, and he played a great role. He obviously learned a lot from Bobby Heenan, so that was a great performance there. And again, really dramatic, emotionally charged, great outing. I think it's Flair's best match in the WWF, without question. And it was just a great match. And when Liz came out, and you didn't know whose side she was going to be on, and she ultimately sided with Randy, and that was great. And after the match, when Randy won the title, Randy's one of the few guys to win 2 world titles at WrestleMania too, but okay, I guess he didn't win 2 world titles. He was given the world title twice at WrestleMania, so that puts him in a pretty elite class from that aspect. And, he retires 1 year, and then he comes back and wins the world title. That's really a funny path for the character, but it was a fantastic match. Just another great Randy Savage WrestleMania match, and his last great WrestleMania match. Because after this, he was a commentator at 9, and Savage was funny on commentary. He wasn't one of my favorite commentators, but he was really funny, especially when interacting with Heenan. So, but it felt weird that he didn't have a match, especially since he was still actively working from time to time. He was in the Royal Rumble earlier that year, so I was a little surprised that they didn't have a match for him. I was like, really? You can't have him work with Shawn or Brett or Luger or anybody? You don't have anybody for or Mr. Perfect, maybe? Anybody? You can't think of anybody for Savage to work with? All right, whatever. But then at WrestleMania 10, he had his final WrestleMania match and ultimately his final WrestleMania appearance as he left the WWF later that year, never to return, which is unfortunate. It was a match with Crush, which wasn't the most spectacular match. It was a Falls Count Anywhere match. But the build-up was great. They actually did a really good job where these two were friends, and then Crush turned heel, and the feud cost Savage his job at the commentary booth as he kept constantly trying to get at Crush. Go back and watch Survivor Series 93 during the match. It was the All-Americans versus the Foreign Fanatics, and Crush was on the Foreign Fanatics team, even though he's American. Go figure. And Savage kept trying to do a run-in in that match, and WWF officials kept trying to hold him back. And that was an awesome moment. It really painted Savage as this really crazy and wild character. And so they did a really good job of building this match up as something that's like where Savage really wants to get his hands on this guy. And the match itself I thought was good. The rules of the match were a little weird, where it was Falls Count Anywhere, but you had to pin the guy outside the ring, and then you had 60 seconds to return to the ring for the match to be over. I thought that was a really weird stipulation. It's like, just get the pin and let it be over, and let it be the first really good Falls Count Anywhere match, but it was a little disjointed from that aspect. But overall, it was a good match, but not a really big farewell to Savage's run at WrestleMania. Like his great final one was WrestleMania 8. Should have been WrestleMania 7 in a lot of ways, but overall, like I said, Savage's contribution at WrestleMania was contributing exciting matchups that really highlighted how good of a worker he really was. And his character worked so great in so many situations that Savage was not only great at getting people to care about his matches, he was also great at performing when it came match time as well. And he delivered some of WrestleMania's finest, in my opinion.